Yes, we are. If you guys want to check on your end, only on here.
It has been 7 years since It has been 7 years. It has been 7 years since tragedy hit us here. It has been 7 years since tragedy hit us here at home. It was this day in 2012. A white supremacist opened fire at the Oak Creek Sikh Temple. Adriana Mendez shares the story of a local couple and the impact this day still carries.
Jaspreet and Pardeep were expecting a child when the mass shooting.
It has been 7.
the sun shines. Okay.
Testing, testing. Okay, if I can get everyone's attention. Good morning. Olympic Heights, good morning. Okay, first of all, thank you for coming to the theater. We just randomly selected some classes, and you're very fortunate that you were chosen because you get to experience this in person. Do me a favor, if you have, and it looks like we did a good job already, but I know we love our AirPods and our phones, but please do me a favor and make sure they're either silenced or off your phone and you put your AirPods away, okay? I'm very excited that we have a special presentation for you today, and we have some special guests here. And I really need you to give your full attention. It's not going to be hard to do that because this is a very engaging presentation. So before I start and introduce our special guest, we have some people that are the reason that we were able to bring the presentation, The Gift of Our Wounds, to you today. There's an organization called Insight Through Education, and we were fortunate enough for them to be able to provide us with this presentation. So I'd just like to acknowledge them. We have Nancy and Joanne, if they would stand up. Thank you so much for doing this for us. And we also have one of our educators from the district that does Holocaust education and a variety of other things, Kimberly Coombs, that I could not have done this without her. So thank you. And most importantly, one of your assistant principals that has really spearheaded this whole event and helped me through it, Mrs. Riley. Let's get a round of applause for her. And I also have, some of you know Dr. Craig Summer in the back. He's trying to hide from me, but in our instructional soup, if you could wave to him. Okay, so we're going to get started. If you guys are on the live feed and you're hearing this, I'm really privileged to be able to start this presentation. The guys that are here today that I'm going to introduce in a moment, they don't know this, but we have a secret. There's 4 major schools in Boca, and we call ourselves the Pride of Boca. We're the Lions, so we're the Pride. So students know when we have guest speakers, they're always amazing, but this is one of the reasons that we are the Pride of Boca, because we give our attention and we do what we're supposed to do, right, guys? So let's show them that today, and without further ado, I'm going to have Leo please start the video. Thank you.
That morning was just a beautiful, serene morning. I had the windows down, thinking to myself, like literally thinking to myself, this is a beautiful morning. Life seemed, it was just great. I start to see squad cars flying by us. The squad car pulls up in front and like tapes it off real quick. I asked the police officer, like, sir, what's going on? And he's like, son, there's a shooting that happened at the temple.
Police say the shooting began around 10:30 Sunday morning as many inside the Sikh temple were gathering for worship. Witnesses said the first shots came outside, inside mayhem.
I felt anger. But then I felt this sense of relief that like I wasn't involved in that. I also felt this incredible sense of guilt. For the past 5.5 years, I've continued to wrestle with those two feelings, survivor's guilt and survivor's relief. I am just appreciative to live this life, but I also have this guilt of I'm not doing enough. And you guys all hear that? When we breathe in suffering and we breathe out healing.
Serve to Unite was founded in response to the August 5th, 2012 Sikh temple shooting. It was a means for the Sikh community to transform this atrocity into something inspirational that would bring people together from that day forward.
It was initially formed to bring about an awareness of the Sikh community, but then we knew that it was going to morph into something much bigger than that to really address communal healing for all communities.
Today, Serve to Unite works with young people from 2nd grade through college. We do arts-driven service learning and global engagement. We also organize a 6K run every year to raise money for scholarships for 6 young people in honor of the 6 victims of the Sikh temple shooting. And recently, Pardeep and I have started working with small towns and municipalities, trying to help them become comfortable with demographic change as populations are changing.
We're weaving in our parts of ourselves into a map of Milwaukee to end the segregation, to bring everybody together.
There's places where people are just not as unified, and if we have a chance to change that, we should definitely do it. Especially with Milwaukee being like that, we should do as much as we can.
So this is the bullet hole that was left by the shooter as he was trying to shoot into the women that were here. He was just shooting from back here. And then Dad's final resting place was in this room, as was the other priest who was working. And he gets out here, and as these responding officers are coming to the scene, they engage in a firefight with Wade Page. and Wade Page takes his own life. The shooter killed himself. There was not much explanation from law enforcement. So I said, let me reach out to Arnold and really find out why white supremacists do these things. In a selfish kind of way, I also wanted someone to raise their hand and say, you know what, I'm responsible for this.
In 1987, me and a few friends of mine started a white power skinhead gang in Milwaukee. We started our own white power skinhead band also. And our band was very much a rallying point for like every pissed off white kid in Wisconsin.
We must secure the existence of our race and the future of white children.
We stoked their anger and their angst, and we blamed it on Jewish people, we blamed it on people of color, we blamed it on gay people. We later got involved in the early stages of what today is known as Hammerskin Nation, and that's the largest organized white power skinhead group on the planet Earth. So nowadays, when violence is perpetrated by this group, I feel a great deal of responsibility. And speaking of which, Wade Michael Page, the man who murdered Pardeep's father and 5 other people, was a member of that group.
I brought that to my buddy Paul.
Basically brought about an inner conversation where I'm saying, where do you get off thinking that you're gonna go waltzing off into the sunset after all of the people you hurt, after all of the harm you've done? I left the movement in 1994. On paper, we couldn't have been more different, but when we sat down and talked, we saw how much we had in common, and it hit us at that point, like, we need to work together. We gotta do something together to basically get this message out to the world, and the more people we can help understand this, the better off we're all gonna be.
Oh yeah, the murals. We had a group of people who painted murals on the walls in our school, and they had positive messages and things to bring the community together. We've also been doing art. We like to connect art.
People of the high school age, that they're the next generation. So it's important to me for them to have a good community for themselves, which will bring a better community for the younger generation and for generations to come.
If we're gonna be the antidote for what's wrong with our society, we really gotta focus on what's right. In my experience, what's right is the truth that human beings have more in common than different.
The more voids that a child has, the more vulnerabilities. So filling those voids with sort of wraparound programming, it takes a village to raise a child. And somehow, some way, we step back from that saying. But I think that saying is more true now than ever. It takes a village to really nurture a child.
To have amazing people in my life like Pardeep Kalika, who have taught me so much and who love me and I love them. Pretty much every day I am literally in this state of joy and gratitude. That's what life's all about.
Peace and love.
Thank you. I am honored to introduce our special guest speakers. The inspiring video speaks for itself that you guys just watched. In the late 80s and early 90s, Arno McAllis was a leader of a worldwide racist skinhead organization, a racial holy war evangelist, and influential lead singer of a heavy metal band, a hate metal band. Single parenthood, love for his daughter, and the forgiveness shown by people he tormented all helped turn Arno's life around, bringing him to embrace diversity, gratitude, and tolerance. He is now the acclaimed author of prize-winning book, My Life After Hate, as well as an educator and filmmaker dedicated to sharing his incredible personal evolution. Pardeep Singh Kalika is a native of Punjab, India. He grew up in Milwaukee, ultimately serving as a police officer and educator in the inner city. He is now active as a therapist specializing in holistic trauma-informed treatment with survivors of assault, abuse, and violence. His passion and life's work is to promote healing and recovery. He and Arno together are the authors of the Book List 2018 Editor's Choice book, The Gift of Our Wounds. Arno and Pardeep speak all around the country with a special emphasis on bringing their message and mission to school children. Please join me in welcoming Arno McAllis and Pardeep Kalika. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, good morning. Am I good on sound? All right. All right, good morning, Olympic Heights. As I was kind of watching the video and thinking and reflecting back on our life, this will be the 10th year, the 10th anniversary of that shooting. This happened in 2012 on August 5th, and it has changed the trajectory of my life. And I was thinking about when I was in your seats, when I was in your chair, and we would have guest speakers, and they would come, and they would speak to us. And oftentimes, we would try to understand what this message was about. And a lot of times, we don't understand it till later. So if something happens and you're feeling some of these feelings later, if you're feeling some of these feelings a week from now, if you're feeling some, Arno and I are gonna make ourselves available. You can reach out to us. You can we still use Facebook, but we have Instagram, Twitter. If there's something that you cannot ask today, nor process in this time right now, feel free to reach out to us and ask that question. Whatever that question is. I had a young man ask us just a little while ago, what this conversation was about. And I generically wanted to tell him, hey, this conversation is about two men who met each other, who are from different parts of the world, but got to understand their humanity through a very tragic situation. We don't need to wait for a tragic situation to happen to understand each other's humanity. Okay? And the other part that kind of struck out to me was my daughter, so Arno and I are brothers. We may not look like we're brothers, but we are brothers. And one of the things that my kids oftentimes ask me, I have 4 children. My eldest is in high school. She's gonna be 17 this year. And one of the questions she asked me a long time ago was, hey, when everybody introduces Uncle Arno, and my kids do call him their uncle, we're friends outside of this. We're friends outside of just speaking together. He comes over to my house. I go over to his house. Sometimes when I walk into his house, and he leaves his house wide open. So sometimes when I walk into his house, I start to raid the refrigerator. Somebody else is in the house, they don't even know you're there. They may come out in their bath towel, like his daughter did. And that's how close our relationship is. Yeah, that's a whole, we can talk about that in the Q&A section. But one of the things that she always asks me is, why do they always introduce Uncle Arno as a white supremacist? And I could see the sincerity in her face. Like, this is my uncle. I've known him for 10 years. I know who he is. We know his family. We know his daughter. We have dinner together. Why do they keep saying that? You see, there's a part of my daughter that morning will always have shattered. That morning, as we were going to the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin, so the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin is like our Sunday school. And I was taking my daughter and son to Sunday school that morning. And the only thing that kept us out of a shooting was that my daughter, at that time, she was 8 at that time. The only thing that kept us out was that she forgot her notebook at the house. And when we had to turn back around and go back to the house, that cost us 10 minutes. I had 2 kids at that time. Both were younger. And it was that 10 minutes that saved our life. There was that 10 minutes that kept us outside of that Sikh temple. Otherwise, I would have had to make the decision of, what do I do while somebody's shooting up this temple? Could I save my 2 little children as a father? And so that place in her still exists today. And I'm not going to imagine to know what each and every one of your lives looks like. When I look at the student body, I see beauty, I see diversity, I see different experiences coming from different places. My experience started in this country when I was 6 years old. My parents came over as first-generation immigrants. My father and mother had $35 to their name. We made home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And for the last couple of days I've been enjoying kind of the sunshine, and everybody's like, man, it's kind of cold out here in Florida. I'm like, you have not been to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because it is cold. So the past couple of days I've been enjoying the sunshine, but one of the questions that I asked my parents for a very long time was, we had all these places to immigrate to. Why did you choose Milwaukee, Wisconsin? So Milwaukee, Wisconsin at that time was like many other places where there was good jobs. You could go there with a high school education and really make it. So my dad and my mom started working. And at that time, $2 an hour was the going rate for people who graduated high school and wanted to get into the labor trade. Over time, I saw them build up their money. They saved. And after some time, they invested. And they invested in the small business. When August 5th, 2012 rolled around, you could say that my parents kind of achieved what was thought of as the American dream. They, like many other immigrants that come to this country, all they wanted was an opportunity. And once they got that opportunity, they showed us how to be grateful. So growing up, I remember always, keeping in mind that, yes, there's a lot of challenge, there's some struggle, but to always be grateful. Meditate on being grateful. And now that's easy to do when things are going right. That's easy to do when you get invited to the parties. That's easy to do when you're successful, whatever that looks like. Now it's difficult to do when things don't go right, when things go bad. But that was exactly what they showed me. And over time, that gratitude led me to a career in policing. I became the first one to graduate in my family from college. I went into policing. I went into policing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin's inner city. And the place that I was policing has a documentary on it. It's called 53206. If you get a chance to check out the documentary, it's a great documentary, but 53206 talks about basically the zip code in the United States that has the highest incarceration of black males. My entirety of policing was not writing traffic tickets or speeding tickets or minor violations. My entirety of policing was getting dope, getting guns, domestic violence, violent crimes. My 5 years. Over 5 years of policing, I decided that was not for me. So, I also had, when you guys were coming in, this nostalgia. So after policing, I became a teacher in the same neighborhood that I was policing in. And oftentimes we would have students and student bodies and speakers and things like this. So it brought back that time when I was teaching. And I taught for 10 years. And it was that summer that August 5th, 2012 happened.
Every time I listen to Pardeep's story, which I've done, well, we've done this hundreds of times now. We've lost count of how many times we've done talks like this. Every one is an amazing experience. We're grateful for every single opportunity we have to share our story, and we're super grateful when we get to hear some of your stories, and we get to have a conversation with you. We are going to have a Q&A session. There are no questions that are off limits. If while you're listening to us talk, a question comes to mind and you're like, ooh, I don't know if I should ask him that. Those are the questions we want. So keep those questions front and center. We're going to get to them in a little bit. But when I think about the American dream that Pardeep's family achieved, coming here with absolutely nothing and building a very successful small business, so much so that Pardeep's dad was able to put his business up as collateral to build the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin, where this shooting happened. That's the American dream. That's what it's all about. I had the American dream handed to me on a silver platter. I grew up in a nice neighborhood, in a nice house. My parents were together. They loved me very much. I had everything I needed. I went to great schools my entire childhood. And rather than take the opportunity to take advantage of all these things that were handed to me, my entire childhood was spent shunning the American dream. People came up to me with this silver platter, and I'm like, damn, that's what I think of your silver platter. Why? I look back at my life, why was I like that? The simple answer is hurt people hurt people. When we're hurting, if we don't have a healthy way to process that trauma, we have a tendency to pass it on to other people. Now, looking at my childhood, it looked pretty idyllic. But underneath the surface, as is often the case, there was other things going on. My father's drinking made my mother's life miserable. And my mother was suicidal throughout much of my childhood. I saw my mother suffering, and it hurt me. And rather than be a good kid, like, hey, Mom, I love you, how can I help? I started to distance myself from her and distance myself from my dad, who, despite the disease he had, was doing the best he could. And I'll point out, my dad wasn't a mean drunk. When I talk about my father's drinking and my mom's misery, often people's minds go, oh, he was beating her, he was abusive. My dad wasn't a mean drunk, he was a fun drunk. When Dad was drunk, we were going to shoot guns and light off fireworks. That was a lot of fun for a little boy. Pardeep has to remind me sometimes that that's not normal. Maybe it is a little more normal here in Florida sometimes.
Yeah.
We had a pistol range in our basement. And at midnight, as soon as I was able to hold a Colt 1911 .45 caliber pistol with my dad's help, we're in the basement range shooting. And Mom's trying to sleep after working 2 jobs because my dad does more drinking than working. And my mom has to support our nice house in a nice neighborhood, keep the bills paid and the lights on, keep track of her kids. I have a little brother. I was an absolute hellion of a kid, so it was like a full-time job taking care of me alone. And my mom had to do all this stuff, and she just couldn't handle it. She made it happen anyway, as women often do. But her suffering made me suffer. And I started lashing out at other kids. I started out as a bully on the school bus in kindergarten. There was one particular kid I beat up every morning because he had big, thick Coke bottle glasses like I wear now. And I don't know what his deal was, but he always had like a boogery nose. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to go punch him in the nose. And then that got boring. I didn't get a thrill from that anymore, so I got a bunch of other kids on the bus to beat him up really bad. The principal sat our whole bus down in front of her and just started tearing into us, and she's letting us have it. And by us, I mean me. She's like looking at me. And I had this like gifted genius moment. I don't know if I told you guys I'm a gifted genius. My mom says, so you know it's true. While the principal's yelling at me and I'm looking at these other kids and they're all terrified, I'm like, I'm not afraid of her. I don't care what she does to me. And so I got up and just shut her down in the middle of that, and I said, you can't do anything to me because I'm not afraid of getting in trouble. There's nothing you can do. And the principal's like, and the kids are all like, and I'm like, yeah, that's what's up. And the whole rest of my childhood, that was me, like pursuing that. I wanted to shock people. I wanted to repulse people. I went from bullying on the school bus to fights in the schoolyard, breaking and entering, vandalism. When I was 14, I started drinking myself. Alcoholism is a genetic disease as well as an environmental disease. So if you have alcoholism in your family, the odds are very good that the first time you take a sip of alcohol, you will be an alcoholic. A disease and an addiction that will consume the rest of your life. When I started drinking at 14, I had 3-4 beers and I passed out. I quit drinking at 34, which was 18 years ago. By the time I quit drinking, I had like this magic number was 18. I could drink 18 beers and still function the next day. And that's the nature of substance abuse. The amount of substance that gets you high the first time doesn't get you high 10 times later. So you have to keep increasing the amount of substance you take in to get the same amount of high. That was how my antisocial behavior worked. Bullying a kid on the school bus was fun the first time. It was a thrill the first time. 10 times later, it's not. So then I kept escalating. The alcohol was like gas on a fire. I got involved in the punk rock scene. I still love punk rock. I don't want to make it sound like punk is some kind of gateway drug to becoming a white power skinhead. To me, punk was about breaking things and pissing people off and shocking people. That's why I was attracted to it. And it was when I was 16 years old that I heard white power skinhead music. And it told me the swastika was the symbol of my people, and that my people were threatened by the Jews who were coming to kill all the white people on the planet Earth. I hope that sounds ridiculous to you guys. That should sound ridiculous to any thinking person. But to 16-year-old Arno, it was literally music to my ears. Because it pissed people off. Because it repulsed people. And that's how I got involved in white nationalism in 1987.
You know, Arno brings up the point that when he was going through as he was growing up, he wanted to shock and repulse people. Now, it's hard to believe that sometimes what happens is the nature of hurt, and as we said, we're going to talk about this theme all morning, is that hurt people hurt people. Behind that wanting to shock other people, wanting to scare other people, was somebody hurting, somebody fearful, somebody who lacked courage. And it's hard to believe that. But we work with people all the time who are either involved in some form of extremism or trying to get out. And one of the things that we notice almost all the time is that this person who is presenting themselves as fierce or powerful is actually fearful themselves. Actually doesn't have that much power. And that's what Arno was going through at those times. When August 5th, 2012 happened, we had to understand that the shooter in our case, and I do want to say his name was Wade Michael Page. The person that killed 7 people, one of those people being my father, had a name. He wasn't simply a monster. Sometimes what we do is we vilify these people and say, hey, that person is just that, and take away their name. Now, that same tactic has been used in this country for a very long time. And it has caused division. And it has put blood in the soil of this country. Soil that we're still working on to try to get to a better future. Some of the same ingredients that have been used have caused what is happening right now. So some of the same tactics will not work as we go forward. And I said this a long time ago, and people were like, why would you say his name? And I said, this was the same child who sat in a high school auditorium at one point. This was the same child who went to a daycare with you all. This was the same person that grew up that didn't get whatever they wanted to get and took it to heart. If we vilify people and just call them monsters, well, I mean, that's an imaginary thing that we can't even do anything about. What happens is we just brush it. Okay, you know what? I can't do anything about that. They're a monster. There's some imaginary thing. But if we start to understand people are people, and many of these people who will present as bold and strong and this and that are actually fearful, are actually worried. If we understand that, then there's something we can do about that. It gives you power back. And so what I wanted to make sure that day, 10 years ago, was I want power back. I want our community, the Sikh community, the small minority community that we lived in, I want them to have power. And each and every day, for about 2 months after that shooting happened, I was like, let's put on a brave face for the world. Let's go out there. And what happened over time was even that got exhausting. So 2 months after the shooting happened, I reached out, and I reached out to Arnold. And one of the questions that I asked him was, why do people like this do these things? And I think that's a question that we all kind of have, is why do people like this do these types of things? And one of the things that you can all come back to is hurt people hurt other people. Sometimes they hurt themselves, but sometimes they hurt other people.
You heard Pardeep say the shooter's name, Wade Michael Page, making the point that before he became a suicidal, homicidal mass murderer, he was a child as innocent as anyone else. Something went horribly wrong between that time when he was an innocent child and August 5th, 2012, when he murdered Prakash Singh, Sita Singh, Ranjit Singh, Suvig Singh Katra, Paramjit Kaur, Baba Punjab Singh, and Pardeep's father, Satwant Singh Kalika. How can someone become so miserable that nothing but homicide followed by suicide seems to make sense? The answer to that is practice. He practiced hate and violence every day of his life for 10 years. He convinced himself that every other human being on the planet was his enemy. He convinced himself that everyone who didn't look like him was automatically an enemy. And he also convinced himself that anyone who did look like him but didn't think like him was the highest order of enemy. He found himself in a world where he's surrounded by enemies who are threatening not only his life in his head, but his entire people who he also hates, ironically. That's the effect of a violent extremist ideology. And I'll point out, as Pardeep said, we work with people to get out of violent extremist groups. And violent extremist groups of all kinds. Not just white nationalism, but violent Islamism. We work with Antifas. We work with political extremists from both sides of the spectrum. We work with environmental terrorists. There are all sorts of reasons that people justify violent extremism with. It's not exclusive to one type of population or another. It's something that can happen to any human being, because we do have far more in common than otherwise. Realizing that is what led me out of white nationalism. I'm going to head off a question that may be in your mind, and that's, how did I get out? It's the most frequent frequently asked question I get. The simple answer to that is exhaustion. It's exhausting living that way. It's miserable to hate people. It makes your life a miserable process. It sucks all of the energy out of you. When you hate someone else, nothing is going to work out in your life. You can't have a healthy relationship with another human being when you hate someone else, because the hate sucks your ability to do that out of you. You will not have a successful career doing anything if you hate people. You will have a miserable life where everything you try to do fails miserably, and you put yourself into a position where rather than looking inward and saying, hey, maybe I should change something, you put yourself in a habit where you blame everyone else on earth for all the things that are going wrong in your life because of your mistakes. And the biggest tragedy of that is that when you do that, you're casting away your ability to solve the problem by blaming everyone but you. That is exhausting. It was exhausting knowing what I was doing was wrong. I knew it was wrong to hurt people. I knew it was wrong to hate people. There were times as I was hitting someone where I had a voice in my head going, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? You're a horrible person. And I didn't have the courage to even acknowledge that voice, much less answer it. So I had to constantly expend energy to suppress this deep knowledge of my inner wrongness. That was exhausting. It was exhausting to cut myself off from pop culture that I grew up taking for granted. To this day, I am a huge sports, music, TV, and film geek, and books. I love all that stuff. Wallow in it all the time. Now, Pardeep and I are from Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin, there's actually a cult that's throughout the whole state. And the cult actually has like tendrils that reaches around the world. And the cult's called the Green Bay Packers. We put cheese on our heads, and we're proud of it. I grew up loving the Packers like everybody else. Maybe someday they'll win an NFC championship game
Hopefully.
again. Well, that's a whole other talk we do about what's wrong with the Packers. But I couldn't watch the Green Bay Packers and root for them as a white power skinhead. That was forbidden by the ideology that I had assumed as my identity. I couldn't watch an NFL football game because doing so made me a race traitor. I was complicit in the destruction of the white race if I cheered for the Packers. Because the Packers are like every NFL team, bunch of black guys, bunch of white guys, people from all sorts of backgrounds, and they have to not only get along, they have to function as a unit if they want a prayer of winning a football game. That was exhausting, to not be able to enjoy things that I once did. And then when I did sneak around and enjoy them behind my buddies' backs, I felt like a hypocrite for watching a football game. That's how ridiculous violent extremist ideology is. That was exhausting. What was most exhausting, though, was when people I claimed to hate treated me with kindness. And I was very fortunate that that happened over and over again throughout the 7-year span that I was involved in white nationalism. There were people like a Jewish boss, a lesbian supervisor, Afro-American and Latino coworkers who refused to engage me on my terms, which was hate and violence. And instead, they dictated the terms of engagement to me. And they said, this is how a human being treats another human being. I'm not playing your game. The game I wanted to play was hostility. It was aggression. I wanted people to not just hate me, I wanted them to swing at me. I wanted violence. And I know I'm a big, gnarly-looking dude, and people are sometimes afraid of me just looking at me, but the truth is I'm really uncoordinated. I couldn't box my way out of a wet paper bag with scissors. Today I actually have post-concussion syndrome. I get a concussion if you look at me sideways. So back when I used to get in all these fights, I got my ass kicked as often as I beat up anybody else. And it didn't matter if I won or lost the fight. All that mattered was that violence happened. When violence happened, I won. That's what I was trying to provoke. So when I forgot to tell you guys, because I'm a gifted genius, I dropped out of high school after sophomore year. I was so smart that there was nothing else I could learn after sophomore year. I dropped out, and my mom, being a very practical person, after trying very hard to keep me in school, said, well, if you're gonna drop out, you gotta get a job. So she got me a job printing t-shirts for a high school friend of hers who had a business doing that. So here I am after sophomore year, I'm printing t-shirts 40 hours a week, third shift, and I was drinking profusely throughout this, starting my white power band, getting all my white kids around me, getting them all riled up. That was what I did. And I'd often come to work super hungover, and I rarely had a lunch because I was too much of a dimwit too much of a drunk really to have a lunch to take to work. And one day I'm at work and I'm kind of collapsed in the corner of the break room in this pathetic hungover heap. And one of my coworkers, Afro-American gentleman named Lonnie, sitting down and he's opening up his lunch. He's got a sandwich that's cut in half. And he sees me in the corner there, and everybody knew my deal. Like you saw all those pictures. Like I had a shaved head, I had swastikas all over me. I'm an outspoken racist, typically had stitches and scars somewhere. Like there was no mistaking what I was about. And if you did mistake it just by looking at me, I was happy to tell you what I was about. So everybody knew, including Lonnie. But he sees me sitting there all pathetic and hungry, open up his lunch, and he goes, hey, skinhead, you want half this sandwich? You look hungry. Now, the last thing I want to do is accept a sandwich from a black man because I'm a superior white, Aryan, Nordic white man, but I'm too much of a drunk to make a lunch, and hunger is a pretty powerful motivator. So I get up, I walk across the break room, I snatch a sandwich out of his hand, I don't say thank you, sit down in the corner, wolf it down. Lonnie just kind of shrugs, goes back to eating the rest of his lunch, starts talking about the Packer game with all our coworkers. And I'm kind of like, oh yeah, what about that? What the? Oh, I can't talk to those guys. They're not white. Like that was my life as a white nationalist. That's how stupid it was. And every time I experienced kindness like that, it drove home how wrong I was. To think that I was better than someone else because of the amount or low amount of melanin in my skin. What a stupid thing. That exhaustion drove home that I needed to make a change. Now, I was terrified to make this change because I'd lived this way for 7 years and I couldn't think of any other way to live. I had also built up this huge image of myself in the movement, as we called it, where I'm the lead screamer in this band. We got groupies, people love our music, they listen to our music all over the world. I'm a reverend in a racial holy war. I'm a founding member of this huge skinhead group. Kids in Germany sit around getting drunk, talking about the time I got hit in the head with a lead pipe and then hospitalized the guy who did it. Like, that's my big, inflated, false, hollow image in the movement. In real life, I'm an alcoholic high school dropout who's too much of a drunk to pay his bills, has to keep moving back home to mommy and daddy's house, and he has a tendency to drink until he passes out and piss all over himself. That was real life. So it was hard to give up all this and face the cruel reality of this and look inward and say, what do I got to do to change this? That was an intimidating prospect. So I needed something big to happen, some kind of catalyst to kind of shock me out of that space. That was a two-stage process. In 1994, my girlfriend and I broke up. Go figure, but hate and violence and alcohol is not a recipe for a healthy relationship between a man and a woman. Remember that, kids. And I found myself a single parent to our 18-month-old daughter. A couple months after that, after a concert my band had played, a second friend of mine was shot and killed in a street fight. By that point, I had lost count of how many friends had been incarcerated. And it finally hit me that if I didn't change my ways, death or prison was going to take me from my daughter. So I left hate groups in 1994. It took a long time to get to the point where I'm like, I need to share my story with the world. That didn't happen until 2010. I quit drinking in 2004. That was a huge milestone in my life. Everything started looking up then, but at first it was very difficult because I didn't have alcohol to numb all the harm that I had done to innocent people, to my family, to the world, to other kids who were hurting, and I twisted their minds and sent them in a really unhealthy direction. So it was difficult to get past that, and I started like getting past it by writing. Writing was very cathartic. Looking at my past with openness and honesty and being accountable for the harm that I've done. I went public with my story on the MLK holiday of 2010. So this year marked my 12th anniversary of doing what we do now. Today, I am one of the most grateful people you will ever meet. I get to travel not just around the country, but around the world and tell stories and listen to stories. I'm going to be going to Europe in the whole month of May, talking to people in Europe. The way that we look at reality can be likened to a lens. So I talked about my Coke bottle glasses. Without these glasses, I can't see anybody here. It's just a big blur. But the lenses in these glasses adjust the lenses of my eyes so I can see things. It resolves things. But the way we think about ourselves and the way we think about the world also creates a lens that literally shapes our reality that we live in. When I was a white nationalist skinhead, the lens I looked at the world through was one of race. Everywhere I looked, the first thing I saw was race. And if it was my race, good. It's not my race, bad. My lens told me that the color of my skin made me different than everyone else, superior to everyone else, and at the same time at war with everyone else. And it created the most miserable 7 years I've spent of my 51. I tried to kill myself twice. It could be argued that the entire 7 years was an ongoing suicide attempt because I didn't care if I lived or died. Today, I still look at the world through a lens. We all do. We all will throughout our lives. And today, the lens that I resolve the world through tells me that human beings have more in common than different. It tells me that this experience we all co-create each waking moment of every day together is something to be primally grateful for. And the result is I'm not suicidal anymore. I'm grateful. I'm joyous. I still get angry. I'm not perfect. I still make mistakes. But as Pardeep likes to put it, he asks people, if you start a car and you're just idling the engine, where does the engine idle? My needle idled at hate and violence for 7 years. Today, I idle at happy. That's my default state. And it's because the lens that I view the world through has changed. So I want to thank all of you guys for being here this morning. I want to thank you all for co-creating this experience with us. If one of you were missing, it would not be the same experience. This goes for everybody watching on the stream also. And I want to open it up to questions now. We're happy to answer any questions you guys may have. Arm there shot up real quick. Do we have someone who's going to bring a mic around?
Yeah.
Thank you,
have
Principal.
one, too? First. You can stand up.
Thanks, guys.
So how do you keep this hope, and how do you keep going and kept going, and no matter what, like even if things went bad, you just kept going? Like, how did you like?
That's a great question, Tawan. You want to?
Yeah.
We can both answer that, but I think Pardeep can start.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Arnold didn't tell you about was, and obviously when we look at the shooter had a number tattooed on his shoulder. And it was a number that I used to play ball. So I used to play
This is
baseball,
weird.
basketball, football. And the number 14 was always my number. And one of the things that I found, like, numbers speak to you sometimes. And he had 14 tattooed right here. And Arnold said it on the video. Basically, it's another name for what white supremacists believe as a mantra, is the 14-word mantra, which is, we shall ensure the existence of our race in the future for white children. And that's been handed down from different people to different people. And so when we're thinking about stopping the cycle of hate and violence, stopping the cycle of that mantra, Arnold didn't tell you about the swastika that he had on his middle finger. And he had that on purpose because he would want to, and I'm not going to middle finger you all, but if somebody was saying like, hey, this or that, he would want to put that middle finger up and say, yep, and this is what I believe in, right? And so I knew at that time, and definitely I think the conversation around what white supremacy looks like as a culture and what white supremacists believe are separate but needed arguments too that go together. But in this case, we were tasked with, can we stop the cycle of white supremacy and what that felt like at that moment? And what is revenge and rage and all of these things going to look like? I could tell you from a personal standpoint that our own personal family, my brother went a different route, completely different route. And he chose revenge and rage. Today, 10 years later, he is still struggling with that. And he has lost a lot. And our family has lost a lot. You have forks in the road. And these forks are going to ask you, which way are you going to, what are you going to do? And sometimes it is a deliberate choice to say, at this point, at this moment, this is what I'm going to live my life by. This person came into the temple, tried to kill everybody inside. At the same time, he killed some people's spirits. And I had to choose, what does forgiveness look like for me? And for all of you, I don't pretend to know what it looks like for you. Some people say, well, forgiveness looks like forgetting. Some people are like, forgiveness looks like something else. To me, it looked like vengeance. And said, listen, I got to come back to my family. I got to come back to my community. I got to come back to myself. So whatever happens in your life, I hope that somehow, some way, you define on your own terms what forgiveness looks like for you. And forgiveness is not forgetting. There's an impossibility of forgetting. Trust me, I have worked closely with, I don't know how many survivors of how many incidents, sexual assault survivors, men, women, everyone. I've worked with nearly every case, and I couldn't prescribe what forgiveness looks like to them. They had to do it on their own terms. But a lot of times there is a sense of freedom that comes with it. And the freedom is not just but the freedom is to reclaim your own life. And so for me, that ending of that cycle said, how do I reclaim my own life? And today, Arnold and I are here in Florida, and we are thankful because really when we started to talk about the American dream, and we looked around at this school and everything that you all do and embody, you are that American dream. You are the embodiment of that. And if ever somebody says to you, okay, the way forward is through hate and violence, it's not. It's through love and compassion. Always. Always. And so if you hear that, right, please choose the path of compassion and love, because you're not just choosing it for other people outside of you. You're choosing it for yourself.
I'm going to affirm what Pardeep said about forgiveness being vengeance. Wade Page, the shooter, took his own life. but I can make a pretty good educated guess about how he thought and what his motives were and what his objectives were, and that we were the same people. He came from the gang I helped to start many years earlier. Wade Page wanted to destroy Pardee. He wanted to destroy everyone who looked like him. He wanted Pardee and everyone who looks like him to feel like they weren't safe in this country, like they weren't welcome in this country, they weren't part of this country. They didn't even belong on the planet Earth. That was his objective. If Pardee went forward from this day when his father was killed and when his community was attacked with hatred for the shooter's objective would be accomplished. Rather than do that, Pardee said, no, you're not going to live in my head. You're not going to get any of my time and energy because I have 4 beautiful children, a beautiful wife, a widowed mother, a community that needs me, high schools that need me, and they're going to get all my time and energy. You don't get any of it. That's vengeance. You guys, other guys, sports fans in the room, in all sports, I love MMA. You hear this a lot in MMA. 2 fighters go in the pre-fight conference. What are you going to do? I'm going to make him fight my fight. I'm going to take it to the ground. We're going to stand up. That's my fight. I'm going to dictate the fight to him. That's an age-old tactic to prevail in a conflict, is to dictate the terms of engagement to your enemy. If your enemy is trying to dictate hate and violence as the rules of engagement, playing by their rules is not a recipe for success. Like I said, people are afraid of me as I'm a big dude. They don't know how soft I really am. But I say to people, hey, if we're going to go fight in an octagon, you'd probably take me, bro. I don't really want to fight you anyway. But if we're going to go fight in an octagon, do you want to make the rules or do you want to let me make the rules? No one's going to say, oh, you go ahead and make the rules. When you fight by your enemy's rules or your opponent's rules, you're not going to win. And so when there's hate and violence in the world, absolutely we got to call it out. We got to point out. We got to decry all this injustice that's happening. We have to bear witness to the trauma that has happened to human beings because of the color of their skin for 500 years on this planet. Trauma that's still happening, that's still hurting people. We absolutely have to bear witness to that. But we do it with compassion. And we do it with love. And we think about our loved ones and the world they live in and what world we want to kind of create for them. And that's how we come to the conclusion that we're going to use love and compassion and forgiveness as our tools, because that is how we create a world where our loved ones are going to be safe and prosperous. So those things are how I keep from giving up. The other thing I do, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it's spite. People like Wade Page, people like the Orlando Pulse shooter, people like the guys who committed the 9/11 attacks. They want to destroy your faith in humanity. They have zero faith in humanity, and they want to destroy everybody else's faith in humanity. That's their objective. So just to spite them and say, you're not accomplishing your objective, homie, because you are not going to destroy my faith in humanity, ever. So I treasure that faith, and I find it everywhere I look. One of the most amazing things about being a human being is that we have the ability to find what we look for. If we want to find reasons to be pissed off, to be outraged, to hate people, to hurt people, we're going to find reasons everywhere we look. But on the other side, if we want to find reasons to love people and find reasons to be compassionate and forgiving, we can find those reasons also. It's a lot more difficult, but it's a lot more rewarding too.
So when you think of the American dream, could the violence, hatred, and ugliness be the 3 main poisons of the American dream? Like when you shunned it, like when you're getting addicted to that poison in you. Why do you think that appears in most humans' life in the early 20s? Because honestly, though, I learned something from my Holocaust honors teacher, Mr. Coles, because the Jews were being blamed on as the scapegoat from the Germans because of how their religion is.
Sure.
And think of it as the ideal racist idea. What do you think when it comes to be blaming others not by their race but on their color? What do you think that makes you?
Yeah, I think that you have a great point, is that somehow, some way we have to redefine what it means to have the American dream or the American promise. And I think those are conversations that we're having right now to see what that means. Now, I'm part of coming into an America that looks different or may look different than the America that you have. But we do have to work with the America that we have right now. We have to work within the school systems that we have right now. We have to work within the law. I mean, like it or not, and I was one that was a law enforcement officer that was part of that culture. And I could tell you about the injustices that exist within the Correctional Institute, Law Enforcement Institute, every single policy, every single system, right, as we talked about, has blood in it. If you go back and you think about it, every one of this was created in a certain way, but now you have to change it. Justice Ketanji Brown was the first African-American justice who was just elected. Things are changing. Like it or not, President Barack Obama was being elected in 2012 for re-election. Things are changing. My family, other families, have an opportunity now. Things are changing. You shape that change. Don't just, hey, you know what? I'm going to fall back from that change. And you know what? We don't need more rejection in this world. We don't need more rejection in this country. You have, and I don't care who you are. I really don't. If you're black, if you're white, if you don't have money, if you do have money, you have what's called American privilege. I come from a place that I've seen starvation at a level that there is no social programs. So we can talk about the bad things in this country, but you're still talking, all of you are talking from a place of privilege. Most people will not starve to death because they just don't have enough to eat. I've seen it. I come from a place that I've seen that. So appreciate what you do have. Stay grateful for what you do have. Yeah, sometimes it sucks. Sometimes it does, and I'm not saying no to that. But there are wars happening in the world. There's famine happening in the world. There are resources that are not available to everybody in the world. Use your privilege to do something for other people in this world.
I would add to that, anti-Semitism has often been described as the oldest hatred. For thousands of years, Jews have been the scapegoat of almost every society they've lived in. In the Dark Ages, Jews were blamed for the Black Plague. Today, people are blaming Jews for COVID. People blame Jews if the crops don't grow. It's, again, we were talking earlier, when you blame someone else, exactly. What if instead of developing a vaccine for COVID, we just blame Jews? We'd be in some pretty rough circumstances right now.
You have a conversation afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. Well, we're going to sit down and talk afterwards, bro. I want to take a few more questions so everybody can have a chance.
Should I go first or? Sir. So if you had, if you had one last chance to say something to the shooter, what would you say? Also, do you believe that he had the chance to change if you would listen to him, if he was actually understood and deep down?
That's an awesome question. I would say to the shooter, a lot of people ask me what I'd say to my old self, and it's the same thing I'd say to him, which is, dude, if you love the world, it's going to love you back. I guarantee it. It's not going to be the most obvious thing. It's going to take some dedication. But if you go through your life with love in your heart for your fellow human beings, it's going to make your life an amazing experience to be grateful for. I do believe that had that shooter experienced the right act of kindness at the right time, as I did, that he could have been diverted from his path. We don't know who the next suffering, isolated person out there on the verge of hurting themselves and someone else, we don't know who they are, we don't know where they are. Which means the more we dedicate ourselves to practicing kindness and compassion and gratitude and forgiveness, the more we take those life-giving things with us everywhere we go, the greater the odds that that person can be reached. And someone can be diverted from making their own life a living hell and making other people's lives a living hell, and to a place where they can be an actual contributing, valuable member of society. So absolutely possible, for sure.
Hi, so I have a question to both of you. As you know, our world is more divided than ever, so you two historically and demographically are polar opposites. So what is your message to those who are polar opposites in today's society and continue to divide our world?
Great question. And I think that, after the shooting happened, we formed this organization called Serve to Unite. And we went around different places and different towns who were turning and dividing themselves, and we asked them to do work together. And so I think just, sake of, I know you guys got to get going soon or going back to class soon, and we'll have some conversation later, but really engage in some conversation together. Right now, you're right, we're more divided than it seems like ever, politically, and people go along political lines and say, okay, I'm developing this political ideology as my mindset and my lens, as Arnold pointed out, and I'm developing this, and so we can't talk to one another. We engage people in talking to one another. We reach out to the people who may be very, very hateful and try to get to them before they do something drastic. And so I think about, am I being a rejectionist? And do your best on...
Okay, hold on, guys, hold on. Can we get a round of applause for our special guest? Thank you. This side only that I'm pointing to. Sit down, guys. This side, go ahead. That side over there can go. Go out that door, please.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
1 second, guys. Middle section can go next.
I'm sorry. I was trying to get to or did you come up with the workshop after? You talking with Riley? You can stand.
I think your guy will.
For it. Middle section, go ahead, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, not till 9:30.
If you signed up for one of the workshops, you still need to go to class first, and then they'll dismiss you. Your TL lead those kids, okay? That's only a handful of you guys.
This.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you, man.
I have a lot of family actually in Oak Creek, Wisconsin.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah.